Today, UNICEF is very pleased to present the preliminary findings of the COVID-19 socioeconomic impact on children, which UNICEF developed together with, in partnership with CAPRI. The COVID-19 pandemic is casting a long shadow in countries across the world and has quickly moved beyond a health crisis alone. As stated by the UN Secretary General, children may not be the face of this pandemic yet, but they risk being among the biggest victims. We have witnessed this during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014. The interruption of social services and economic breakdown indeed claimed more lives than virus itself, affecting the most vulnerable segment of the society, particularly children. Immediately after the first identified COVID-19 case in March 2020, government of Jamaica has taken decisive actions to respond and to contain the outbreak. UN has been working alongside the government and partners by supporting health system led by PAHO, and by addressing the need of critical sectors such as education, social protection, special protection of vulnerables like children and women, also food security. As COVID-19 crisis in Jamaica moves to its 6 months, we have been already in this for 6 months, it became important for us to assess the impact that families and children are having, so that UNICEF and other partners can provide adequate support to the government partners in its effort to assist the most affected families and children. Many of the findings that we are going to present today are the confirmation of something that we have already predicted, but some goes beyond what we have imagined. True, we knew the income of many families are affected. But did we know that the income of the poorest families who were making barely enough to survive prior to COVID is seeing their family income almost halved? Did we know that? The study also revealed that almost 60% of poorest families, again, are being exposed to the food insecurity, and they are coping by having smaller portion of food every day or fewer meals a day. On the other hand, we have been concerned about children being away from school, but this survey also found that distance learning is reaching about 90% of children in primary school and over 80% of secondary school children. Today, after CAPRI's presentation, we will also hear from Ms. Liana Robinson, the member of UReport Youth Council and a high school student. She will share her personal experience as well as the experiences of other children from school closure. We will have a question and answer session after these two presentations. Please do write questions in the comment section, comment section, or raise your hand to facilitate the moderators. A final report of this study will be available in October, and we will be sharing the presentation with you after this session today. So thank you very much, and I will hand over to CAPRI. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mariko. I love that you introduced the work by pointing out that the COVID-19 pandemic has cast a long shadow, a long and a broad shadow. Broad in that it has impacted every aspect of society and every group. And long insofar as 6 months after its onset, we now realize that it's going to be with us for a long time. So in the midst of this situation that has so many impacts and for such a long time, it is really so appropriate that we have identified that children stand to be really the most affected and that we need to pay particular attention to them. And CAPRI is thrilled that UNICEF has been able to find a way for us to do this research in real time while we are still managing the crisis, and therefore in such a timely manner that we can begin to implement mitigating measures. And this research is going to help us to identify in what direction we should move in terms of management and mitigating of the effect on children. I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at the presentation. Just give me a second here to get this loaded. So we were tasked with trying to identify the depth and dimensionality of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on children, on Jamaican children, and we think, given the characteristics of Jamaica, this actually has implications for the rest of the world. Let me just ask, are people seeing the presentation on the whole screen, or are you seeing the presentation screen?
No, not whole screen. Maybe you may want to adjust it, Damien.
Yes, I can adjust that. Just give me 1 second to do that. Just give me 1 second to adjust that. All right, there we go. So our objective was to identify, to be able to suss out what is the impact on children in Jamaica, and also to see if we can get a sense of what is their capacity to respond to the situation that households with children have found themselves in. We sourced information from desk research by conducting key informant interviews, and in particular by conducting a large-scale representative survey. The survey was conducted between the end of June and the middle of July. We reached 30% of the households by an online platform and 70% by interview-assisted telephone interaction. It was a stratified random sample, for those who are familiar with the statistical details, stratified by income level and by geographic location. We reached more than 500 households, which incorporated more than almost 2,000 individuals. We focused on 2 channels through which households with children were going to be affected. One is the loss of income of households, and the other is the closure of schools, which meant that children were not only confined to their homes, and that presented its own challenges, but also that the educational delivery would now be taking place remotely. So we're going to look at each of these in turn and then look at their combined effects. We start with looking at the impact of the loss of income. And the lead researcher on this project, who is Kellyanne Dixon Hamill, is going to be assisting with going through these results.
So on average, monthly income has been reduced for households by 46%. What is even more interesting, though, is that the worst off and the most vulnerable have been impacted the most. So those in rural areas, those in the lower socioeconomic groups, and those households that are headed by females. To be able to accommodate this loss of income, households have employed different coping strategies, but savings is the one that has been used the most. This is interesting in that 50% of the households stated that their income could only last them, their savings could only last them for 2 weeks. Another coping strategy is that households have applied for some form of social protection. And we're seeing that most families, approximately 2/3, applied for such assistance. And over 80% of them have been successful with either one or more of these options.
So it strikes me that it is evidence of the extent to which the economic impact was significant, that 2/3 of families felt the need to apply for some kind of assistance. 2/3 of families with children. And not even all of those were able to receive it.
The loss of income also has a nutritional effect. And 44% of households stated that they had experienced food shortages. Once again, the most vulnerable have been impacted the most. So those in our rural areas, those in the lower socioeconomic groups, and those with more than one child in the family. The vast majority of households with children are therefore consuming less meals or smaller meals to cope with the shortage of food.
What is striking about that is that we see a direct connection, a high correlation between loss of income and a nutritional impact. It really tells you it highlights what we already know about the most vulnerable, that there is no cushion. Once there's an income loss, it very greatly and quickly affects nutritional intake. And so it reminds us that we are not looking here at statistics, we're looking at the impact on households with children and therefore the impact on children, and really tells you the gravity of the situation that we are facing in relation to the status of children. We now turn our attention to looking at some of the consequences of the closure of schools.
Most children were able to participate in some form of educational learning. However, for those who were not participating, we see at the basic and primary levels that it was either because of no facility being available or no interest. However, at the secondary level, the facility was available, but most who were not participating either did not have a device or connection to data. As it relates to satisfaction, most stated that they were satisfied. However, we do see that there is a significant percentage who were dissatisfied with the distance learning mechanisms that were implemented, and therefore suggests that there will be or has been some learning loss.
We should bear in mind in looking at this particular result here that parents are expressing dissatisfaction not with the overall educational experience at this time, but with the educational experience relative to attending school, which many parents were not highly satisfied with to begin with. So what we are seeing here is, as Kelly points out, evidence of a learning loss relative to regular school, in which case the percentage of those who are dissatisfied really looms quite large.
80% of children in the households have access to the internet or to device, but there is 20% who do not have any access. What is also interesting is that for those who have access, they are using mainly mobile data, and this is especially true in our rural areas and for those in the lower quintiles. And this is borne out with the types of devices that are used. As we see at the primary and secondary levels, of the phone, mobile phone, is the main instrument being used. And it's also interesting that WhatsApp is the main method of communication that teachers are using with their students. 34% of children do not have exclusive access to a device for educational purposes. And this poses a challenge because it means that children are not able to work when they want to work or when they need to work. They are dependent on whoever else they are sharing that device with.
So it's one thing for the school to have a facility in place and for there to be a device in the household and for there to be internet access. But in the absence of having an exclusive device, children may still not be able to participate in the school activity at the time that the school has scheduled it.
The majority of parents are willing to send children back to school once they reopen. But for some, we are seeing that the disengagement is permanent. And especially this is concerning at the secondary level, where 15% have said that their children will not be returning to school when they reopen.
In the midst of what we are presenting here as a lot of data and quite a few interesting findings, this is probably one of the most worrying. This is a consequence that UNICEF raised internationally at the beginning of the pandemic worldwide and the closure of schools. UNICEF pointed out that one of the gravest consequences of the closure of schools and the pandemic is that they feared that many children would not return to school after the pandemic. And what we have here is strong evidence of that. That if you look at maybe being more than 20% of secondary school attendees, if half of those flip to the no category, then it means 15% no and half of maybe. It means a quarter of secondary school students might drop out of the system, at least for a significant amount of time. And that's a huge learning loss.
The reasons for not wanting to send children back to school include fear of infection, no resources, medical issues, and some are just playing the waiting game. Since children have been home, They have been spending twice as long in front of a screen when compared to pre-COVID. And coupled with this is that almost 40% of children are not getting any exercise at all. Therefore, there is some health implication there. But back to screen time, we're seeing that 12% are either never or seldom monitored by their parents or an adult in the household when online. And therefore, this makes them more vulnerable to inappropriate content.
So having looked at the implications of loss of income and closure of schools as independently, we also found that there are impacts that the combination of these two stresses on the households were having on the children.
So we're seeing that households with children or in other words, children in these households are experiencing increases in, for example, overeating, anxiety, sadness, and fear. And this is concerning because these are also linked with depression. With adults and children sharing the same space for longer periods, we are also seeing that 41% are shouting at their children more often. And there's also been an increase in the occurrence of spanking.
So we are left with a number of concerns as a result of our investigation into the status and welfare of children in the midst of the pandemic and the management of the pandemic. A few that jump out are the increases in food insecurity and the nutritional impact. What is significant about that, as we all appreciate, is that nutritional impact has a long-lasting effect on development. We see evidence of learning loss and regression that is also going to have a long-lasting effect well beyond the crisis. We see evidence of increases in mental health issues, and that too will have a long-lasting effect. And even though we were not able to gather direct and robust evidence of abuse, physical and sexual, then there was a concern about at least increased exposure and opportunity for those, anecdotal evidence of it, as well as information that we have gotten from key informant interviews. So that too is a concern. What do we need to do? We need to institute strict biosecure protocols in schools. This is not only to keep the children safe, but also to reassure many of the secondary schoolers and their parents that it is indeed safe to send their children back, so we can minimize the fallout, minimize those who refuse to go back to school. We need financial support for families, specifically to be able to provide nutritional support for children. Internet access now becomes a much greater divider than it was 6 months ago. And universal internet access for the benefit of school children becomes a critical public good. Because of the problems of inadequate supervision of children who now have to learn from home and who now need to be protected from inappropriate content online, there's a need for greater flexible work and leave arrangements for many workers. In the face of the emotional stresses, there's a need for psychosocial support services for both the children and for their parents. And finally, stronger mechanisms need to be put in place to detect and to report on child abuse. And those are what we think is appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Damien and colleagues from CAPRI. Now I would like to hand the floor over to Leanne, who will share, as I said, she's a 17-year-old high school student. She will share her experience and then the experience of her friends, so we can hear from children's perspective what they are going through. So Leanne, over to you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to see if you all can hear me. My audio is okay?
Yes, your audio is perfect.
All right, great. Okay, so good day, ladies and gentlemen. A special greeting to the Executive Director of CAPRI, the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Dr. Damien King, UNICEF representative, Ms. Mariko Kagashima, and to my colleagues within the UNICEF Youth Council. As stated earlier, I am Rihanna Robinson. I'm a member of the UNICEF's Youth Council, and I'm also the National Public Relations Officer of the past and current National Secondary Students Council executive body. Upon consultation with the cohort that I represent, I am here to provide more insight on the youth experience due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, Jamaica recorded its first COVID-19 case on March 9, 2020. This single case sent shockwaves of fear and worries through the entire population, including what we would like to describe as the most resilient of the populace, the youth and the children. The truth is the majority were petrified, as we knew how badly this virus was rummaging through foreign countries. The extent of the impact felt on the youth population was absolutely unpredictable. This pandemic is so much more than a health crisis. It has affected youth in particular in a plethora of ways, initiating major struggles for the youth population, but equally so, enabling young people to now unlock and maximize on new aspects of themselves and their lives. Schools were ordered closed on March 13, 2020, originally for 14 days. This was extended with each COVID-19 update that the government gave until May 4, when it was announced that schools are to remain closed physically, but they would continue with distance and virtual learning. This occurred concurrently with the heightened cases from the Alarico workplace cluster in St. Catherine, yielding over 600 cases from that cluster alone, causing a lockdown of the entire parish. This was in addition to the other communities that were in lockdown across the country. Physical school closure had a major impact on the lives of students and their parents. This harshly highlighted the digital divide in our country, where many students, more so in rural parishes and low-income areas, are without gadgets and without access to internet connection. This has disenfranchised some students, as they are now unable to fulfill the requirements that they need to meet for their fundamental right to an education. According to UNICEF U-Report's Distance Learning Poll, 32% of students had access every day, 56% had access some days, and 11% had access none at all. This speaks volumes to me, as the majority of students are unable to constantly access their classrooms and their teachers. This also rang true as the National Secondary Students Council also did a poll regarding CXC examinations, and 64.7% of students, as at May 17, 2020, had not been in contact with their schools and teachers to finish their syllabus for their respective subjects. And we must take into consideration that this was 2 months after schools had closed. Whilst this was a challenge, the level of effectiveness and interactive nature of the physical classroom in comparison to the virtual classroom had declined. This found students adapting to this whole new way of learning, finding creative ways to grasp concepts, for example, making songs, poems, Powtoon videos, and much more to store information being taught. Students also had to band together to help each other. Many current and past students, as well as youth organizations, hosted live sessions and meetings to assist students in various subject areas, forging partnerships and encouraging students to hold themselves accountable, ensuring that they all maintained discipline without the presence of a teacher, which I think was very important. Computer literacy was another issue highlighted due to both students and the teachers being unfamiliar with the new classroom settings on these virtual platforms. However, as expected, the students would have caught on much faster and they in turn became the teachers, demonstrating to their teachers how to manipulate these virtual spaces effectively. I must highlight how exceptional it is for students to play that part, displaying that we aren't only meant to be objects of intervention, or we're not only meant to learn in the classroom, but we can also contribute and impart our knowledge on our teachers as well, to our teachers rather. With the closure of school also came a severe decline in mental health among students, such as anxiety due to the extensive uncertainties that came with the lack of structure in the teaching and learning process, especially during the external examination period, as well as depression due to reduced physical contact with the outside world. Many students received a reality check from being home every day, showing them that they aren't as strong as they originally thought. This conflict was man versus mind, and they were quite unsure who would win. Sleep patterns were also tremendously affected, and this would have also contributed to the decline of students' mental health. I must also add that many different youth organizations hosted sessions to aid in this growing issue. Equally so, students were able to learn new things about themselves, develop new hobbies that some were able to maximize on and monetize, such as creating a virtual business from cooking, baking, graphic design, and even vlogging. Many students were also home with no parent supervision and had to play parenting roles for their younger siblings and any other younger child that was within the household, ensuring that they were safe, fed, and comfortable, as well as supervising their distant learning. This was definitely bittersweet for them, as whilst they loved their siblings, there was a heightened level of frustration. In addition to that, to the aforementioned lockdown of many communities, including the entire parish of St. Catherine, caused many young persons' lives to be at a standstill. They were forced to stay inside and were only allowed outside on shopping days. Boredom became the order of the day, which caused a further increase of frustration and tension between children, adolescents, and their parents. In conclusion, this atmosphere has been a truly trying time for the youth population due to several different factors. However, it has also been a time of new beginnings that allowed us to unlock various aspects of ourselves that were hidden under the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we would like to move on to the questions and answers session. I will hand over to Donis to moderate this session. There were a number of questions posted on the chat. And Donis, some of the questions you probably may refer to some of the UNICEF specialists, etc. But anyway, and then you can distribute the questions to relevant colleagues. Donis, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mariko. I think we can direct the first two to CAPRI. Good morning, everybody. So we have a question on what is the cause for the increased risk for sexual abuse if family and parents are at home. If families/parents are at home. So what's the cause for the increased risk of sexual abuse? And the second one is, could you provide the definition for household head? I ask this because the findings that the most vulnerable houses are headed by women. However, do these women have a partner, or are they lone mothers? So those are the two first questions.
The first, the question in relation to opportunity for abuse. The typical situation is not that the family is at home, it's that the children are at home and the parents are away. And second of all, depending on how you define family, depending on how large the extended family is, that opportunity and that risks might exist within the family. So you need to be, it can be a risky situation. for, for, for children. And especially just a mere fact that the children are out of school. Normally they'd be in school and that would occupy them, including commuting, for perhaps 6 to 8 hours a day. And now they are, in which case in the school environment, they are around lots of other children and in the classroom. And no, that is not the case. So that is where that comes from in relation to household head. Kelly?
So household head is defined typically by the respondent in terms of some will define it as who is the person making the decisions, while others may define it as the person who has more, who is bringing in more of the income. We collected information about members of the household, but we are not necessarily sure as to whether these are lone mothers or if these females have partners. Because as you can appreciate, a household will have many members and including many adults. So who is a partner and who isn't exactly clear.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kelly. So in reply to the question, could we receive a copy of the presentation and the report? The report is still being finalized. We decided to give you a sneak preview. So yes, definitely you will get a copy of the presentation. We can email that out, and the final report once it is ready. We have 2 questions on the frustrations. Next, on the frustrations of parents about the increased use of online and distance learning, online schooling, as well as the frustrations.
Can I suggest I would take the questions one at a time?
Right. Okay, no problem. Okay. So the question is, what were the frustrations revealed by parents about the increased need or use of online learning?
So this information we would have obtained from our key personnel interviews. And there were 2 main aspects to it. One was that they were not necessarily able to assist the children. So even though work was sent for the children, they were not able to assist them with some of the learning. And the second part would be related to income. So with reduced income, but the need for data and the need for a device, some parents were not able to provide as they would have wanted.
All right, and the other question on the frustrations would be what with frustrations, which is similar to what you just mentioned, frustrations of secondary school students with online learning.
So yes, so thanks, Danet. In addition to those 2, some schools were not able to provide what was needed quickly. And so it took a while and we can also appreciate that to an extent some of the teachers were learning. And so that was one of the frustrations that the students would have had, whether this was specific to secondary school students or secondary and or primary, we are not entirely sure because it wasn't disaggregated that way.
All right, okay, thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna take a little break. I see we have a hand up, so we're gonna break from the chat for a while. Joy Crawford has her hand up. Joy, would you like to voice your question?
Sure, thank you very much, Donna. Good morning, colleagues and friends.
Hi.
Joy Crawford, E for Life. This one, I guess, is for Kelly. I just wanted to expand a little bit more about the household dimension of women-led household. I think it said single mothers or single women. And I just wondered what was specifically different or unique for them to be mentioned as a category. Was there anything that separated them in particular from households, for example, where there were fathers only, and or households that had both men and women in leadership. I just want to know what was unique about it. And then the last one would be a little bit more about, did the research look at or explored or unearthed COVID on the children in terms of their health status outside of nutrition? When you were interacting with the households, were there any other significant impact on the health of the children? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We singled out what the category that is normally called female-headed households because there's a huge literature that has led us to, that has evidenced that female-headed households are particularly vulnerable compared to both male-headed households to a small extent and to households that have two adults who are income earning and making decisions. And so we followed that historical precedent to see if that vulnerability factor would bear out here, and it turns out that it does.
As it relates,
thank you very much.
sorry, as it relates to other health outcomes, we found that for the most part, children were able to get the necessary treatment when needed. One informant mentioned that for the first 2 or so weeks of the lockdown, they saw a slowing in the number of children coming in, whether it's for their regular appointments or immunizations. But after that, things pretty much went back to normal. So with there's the nutritional component and there's the emotional components, but apart from that, things seem to have been okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're moving into questions now centering around children with disabilities. So, sorry, I had a slight technical difficulty here. Right, so the question is, well, basically, was there an exploration on the impact of this new normal on children with special needs? And also, was there a correlation between computer literacy of parents and the attendance of children online? So the first part of the question is the exploration of the impact on the new normal on children with special needs.
So yes, there was some exploration on that impact. We found, and this would have come through multiple informants, that children with disabilities, their parents were experiencing frustrations because at school it's routine. They have access to, for example, a shadow if needed. The classroom is set up in a form that aids their learning, which is not necessarily available in the home environment. That's one. And two, in some instances, children with special needs were not necessarily included in that educational bubble. So things got out to them later than other students from the school. As it relates to the second question, the correlation between computer literacy of parents and attendance of children to online sessions, do not have any information on the computer literacy of parents.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. And now questions are coming in fast and furious. So next one from Tana Thomas is, what's the percentage of children whose nutrition was negatively affected due to a loss of income in their home?
Percentage of children
whose nutrition was negatively affected.
Right. We can, at this stage, we can only speak to the percentage of households,
Right.
and not necessarily the percentage of children.
Mhm.
And the percentage of households figure
Was 44%.
as presented in the presentation, in the formal presentation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. So, was there differentiation made between internet access through Wi-Fi in the household, Wi-Fi access in the community, aka public access, and mobile access? So yes, there was. So Kelly, you want to pick up on that?
Yes. So as Donette had mentioned, there was a differentiation, and we are finding that the majority are using mobile data, phone or credit plan.
All right, so we have two more in the chat, not seeing any additional hands raised. So Cynthia would like to be reminded of how many families were included, perhaps I could, and how they were selected. You mentioned reaching 2,000, approximately 2,000 persons were the families of similar sizes. So just a reminder of the sampling process and how the families were selected.
Well, as we reported in the presentation, it was just over 500 households, and they were selected by means of a stratified random sample. Those households would have had various numbers of children.
Mm-hmm.
The average number of members per household is just under 4, and on average they had 1.74 children.
All right, thanks. And to add, we only sampled households with children. Next question, very conscious of the time, so we'll have to cut off with these last two. It was mentioned that the recommendations, it was mentioned in the recommendations that we implement measures to have students go back to school. Why is this the recommendation, and as opposed to being more proactive about providing more internet access?
Well, the recommendation was also to provide more internet access. We did point out how massively important it is at this point for us to have universal internet access for households with children. But at the same time, because we highlighted some of the consequences of just being out of school, many of which we think to be significant, detrimental, and permanent, that at the same time, it is important to create protocols and practices so that children are and parents are comfortable with them going back to school. The fact is that, however effective, even in the presence of universal access to internet, remote learning is not as effective as children being in school. And so we have to keep our focus on trying to get children back to school so that we can continue the more effective learning mode.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. So, and finally, we have from Shelley Trim. Do you know the average monthly cost for mobile data? So I think I can quickly respond that no, we did not capture the cost to the family for mobile data. I don't know if CAPRI had any anecdotal information on that, but
no, that was not part of the survey.
Right. All right, so we are closing off the Q&A session. I just want to say, if you have any other burning questions, I think everybody would have been invited by email. You could just reply to that email if you have additional burning questions, or if you want to just continue typing in the chat, we can address them after the meeting and reply to you otherwise. So thank you very much, and I'll turn you back over to Mariko.
Thank you so much, Donis, and thank you so much, CAPRI colleagues, for answering questions, and then the participants to posing questions, very engaging questions. I just want to, before closing, I just want to highlight some of the key findings. So we are concerned about the situation of income. 86% of households surviving on their own savings, and almost 1 out of 2 declared that they have sufficient savings to support them only for 2 weeks or less. 1 in 2 persons are having enough savings only to survive for 2 weeks or less. Those are households with children I'm talking about. And also a very high impact seen among the female-headed household, family with children, more than one, and a family with more than 1 children, and rural areas. Those families with children, those families are having a very high impact in reduced income as well as food insecurity. Social protection, related to social protection, there's going to be more information in the final report, but income is one of the biggest impacts they are having. And because of that, food insecurity is extremely high in the lower income families. In terms of learning, 60% are satisfied with distance learning, but important to mention that 40% are not satisfied. So we need to analyze what causes these differences in perception or the satisfaction of the learning opportunities that are being offered. And it also shows that we really need to ensure the access to device as well as internet to all children for the distance learning in order to ensure the distance learning. One of the concerning trend is that, as you know, violence against children is quite already high in Jamaica. 85% of children under 15 have experienced violent discipline. That means have experienced being shouted at or spanked or hit or more. 85% of children. So this is the baseline we are talking about. So when children, the parents say 15% more spanking is being done at home, or 41% more shouting is occurring in the household, this is very concerning, and then we need to look at these issues very seriously. We are finalizing, as I said at the opening remarks, the final report, and then we hope that we can share that with you or present the final report in October. But we will be sharing this preliminary report presentation to all of you. If you want to make sure, please send your email address, because my IT colleagues are saying that some of the emails are very difficult to capture from this login participants list. So if you don't have any other burning questions, I would like to thank everybody who participated in this presentation, and I thank CAPRI colleagues, and I close this session, and it was 49 minutes session, 1 hour session. So thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.